Well, good morning. Welcome to week number 1 of Unqualified. I am so excited that you guys are here this morning. This will be the most encouraging series you have ever heard. I promise you that. It's going to be an awesome one. And we're talking about one thing in this series, and the tagline is here, how God uses broken people to do big things. Broken people to do big things. And you might be thinking, well, DJ, that doesn't sound very encouraging. You're calling me broken? You're calling me unqualified, but I think if we all really dig down, are we really, any of us qualified to do big things for God? I don't know about you. I've messed up too much for that. But God looks at me and he goes, you know what, I want to use you anyway. And then God looks at you and he says the same thing. Before we get into this series, there's 2 things I want to share with you. Last night, we held our very first ever marriage conference, and it was amazing. It was really cool, really cool. Thank you to those who volunteered to help make that happen, who served in some capacity. And they're not here, but South Shore Church hosted us. So we kind of put them out for a night, and I say thank you to them in front of our church. Pastor Nick Williams over there, amazing pastor. So great work over there, all right? So thank you guys so much for that. And then also, I want to give you an update on our Kingdom Builders. Because we as a church, we are on the move, aren't we? We're going to a new location, and we set a goal of $200,000 to make that happen. We're going to a permanent facility where we can reach people on a full-time basis, and we're really excited about that. We had a $50,000 matching fund that we met, which is really cool, right? Okay, I'm the only one excited about that. That's awesome. That got us halfway there. We have a $25,000 matching fund that we have met. That's awesome. That's cool. So we are 3/4 of the way to our goal. And so we have $50,000 to go. And I'm inviting you to participate in the miracle that God is doing in our church. Because our city, we want to reach it for the gospel of Jesus Christ. We want to be a city on a hill. We have people knocking on the doors while we're there, wanting to come in already, saying, when does the church open? Can you talk to me about Jesus? I'm telling you, God is priming us for something. This is our miracle. Let's be a part of it together. Amen? Amen. I'm really excited about that. So that's Kingdom Builders update. We're getting closer and closer, and I really believe that God is going to use us in a great way once we get there. He's going to use us in a great way right here in Brookside Middle School, even this morning, right? So today we're talking about God using unlikely people, broken people, unqualified people, and there's 2 characters we're going to highlight this morning. The first one is Moses. Moses kind of introduces us to this topic of being unqualified. You see, Moses, you may have seen the movies or the Disney animation where they sing a lot called The Prince of Egypt, right? But Moses' story is pretty simple. He was born as a slave in a time where it was not, you couldn't have babies, so they were going to kill Moses. But God saw that Moses was special and created a divine way for him to be saved, and he actually got raised by Pharaoh's family. So he grew up as royalty. Until one day he tried to take things into his own hands, messed up, and was exiled from Egypt, ran away after he murdered someone. Now he's a shepherd on the backside of the desert thinking he's unqualified. He's not a leader. He's all alone on the backside of a desert, and his closest companions are his sheep. One day God shows up to him and he's in a burning bush. You may have heard the story. The bush burns, but it's not consumed. So Moses says, I'm going to go see this strange sight. And he walks up and God says, take your shoes off, you're on holy ground. And in that moment, God begins to download on him this incredible plan of I want you to go back to Egypt, and I want you to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go, and I want you to lead them out of the exile into a land that I will show you, the land that your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather Abraham was promised, and I want you to go and lead these people. And Moses is like, you got the wrong guy, bro. You have got the wrong guy. God, do you remember what I did in Egypt last time I was there? Do you remember that I murdered someone, that I had to run away to flee for my life? Do you remember any of this, God? And God goes, oh, I remember it, but I'm still choosing you. And Moses in that moment goes, God, I am so unqualified for this. And he has this conversation with God. He says, God, I can't go back there. God says, go. And he says, well, I can't speak properly. And he goes, well, I'll have your brother go with you. He can speak properly. Well, he keeps protesting back and forth and arguing with God. And I love this one argument, Exodus chapter 3, verse 13. He goes, okay, so say I go down there. But Moses protested. They, the people of Israel, the slaves down there, they will ask me, what is his name? You say God talked to you? What's his name? What does he call himself? How do we know you're not lying? This whole burning bush thing sounds like a big joke, right? Like what do I tell them? What should I tell them when they ask that question? And this is God's response. Say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. Now, I don't know about you. I read the Bible with a sense of humor. And I put myself in Moses' shoes, and I'm not wanting to go on this grand journey, this big calling, because I feel pretty inadequate for it. And I'm standing before the burning bush, and I go, God, please don't make me go. But if I do go, what am I supposed to tell them when they're like, hey, what's your name? And God goes, I am. I'm thinking, God, you missed a word. I am. Then there's the blank, right? Like God, what's the blank? So think about it like this. Let's check it out. I am. God, where's the deliverer, the helper? Can you give me a noun, a person, place, or a thing? Is it like Wheel of Fortune or what? No, what's that? Is that Wheel of Fortune where they spin the letters? God, I'll do anything. Just give me a name, man. Like I am something. It could be a verb, maybe a descriptor term, like awesome, like ooh, the awesome God sent me, right? Like what is it going to be? But you know what? I think after a while Moses probably got it. It took me a while to get it. I am. You see, God doesn't need a third word because he's all the third words. You want powerful? He's got powerful. You want present? He's always present. You want knowledge? God's got that too. He's the answer to all the questions. He doesn't need a third word because he's all of them at once. Who's going to deliver us, Moses? God goes, I am. Who's going to save us from the Egyptians? I am, will. The great God. You have questions? Who's the answer? God is. He's the fill in the blank on all of these. Doesn't matter when, doesn't matter where, doesn't matter for how long or what the problem is. God says, I am the answer to the question. I'm the answer to the questions you haven't asked yet. I'm the answer to the questions you don't know you're supposed to be asking. I am. I am. Now that works for God, right? But that doesn't work for you. We pick up these third words all the time in our life, don't we? Maybe it comes from your childhood. Maybe it comes from a mistake you made. Maybe it comes from your profession or your relationship or a relationship that was broken. Maybe it comes from a talent or ability, or maybe it comes from a failure. But all of us have these third words. But the interesting thing is that God has third words for you too. And all of us live in this balance between who the world says we are, who we believe we are, and what God says about us. You see, I grew up and I picked up third words along the way. Some are good, some are bad. Some of them I love. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a pastor, I'm a leader. I love those third words. But there's some other things that my third words revolve around my mess ups and the mistakes I've made and the things in life that define me that I don't want them to define me. Then I come over to this side and I'm like, wow, but God has some third words for me too. How he loves me, how he's embraced me, how he's got a calling and a plan and a purpose for my life. And that third word that he has for me is ever changing and ever growing with the destiny and the goal that he has for me. As I chase the dreams that he lays and downloads into my heart, every single time there's something new, there's something, a discovery that's happening. See, all of us live in this balance between the third words that we pick up along the way and what God says about us. You see, this series, Unqualified, isn't just about God using you, but it's a series about identity. It's about knowing who you are in God. It's about you filling in that third word with a word that God says about you, not just what the world labels you as. Not just what you think that you're supposed to be, but what he actually says about you. This series is based on a book by Stephen Furtick called Unqualified. And I want to give you a couple snippets from this book throughout this series, throughout this message, that can kind of help you begin to grasp the point of this series in this book called Unqualified, on identity. So here's one quote that I want to share with you guys real quick. But often we don't know who we are, and that is the deadly disconnect. There's a disconnect. We may know who God is, but we don't know who we are. See, it's one thing to know who God is to you, but do you know who you are to you? Do you know who you are to? Maybe you can describe and define God, but does that sync up with how you describe and define yourself? If God's great and we were made in his image, shouldn't we go, you know what, God has a plan for me and I should follow that? If I'm supposed to be a reflection of God, shouldn't I drop all the third words that don't reflect God? Shouldn't I live in an identity that he's given me and not one that I'm coming up with on my own? Not one that the world is giving me, not anything. Shouldn't I live with an identity that comes from him and not from myself? I should. So that story with Moses kind of introduces us to this topic of identity. It introduces us to the topic of being, well, unqualified. See, we're not really qualified, but we're not the qualifiers he is. And that's what the story of Jephthah teaches us. Jephthah is an Old Testament character. He's mentioned in the New Testament one time, and literally the line goes, we don't have time to talk about him. So that's Jephthah. He's a pretty obscure Old Testament character. There's not a lot of people who have ever even heard his name. But in fact, he wasn't even on my radar until I was doing devotions with my little girls a little while ago. Leah was with her small group of ladies, and I was at home with the 4 kids, putting them to bed. I get the little 2 down without a lot of crying, because there's some crying, you know what I'm saying? Just little 2. And then we've got the older 2, and I was sitting down with them to read their devotion, because every night before they go to bed, we do devotion. We read God's Word with them, and so we have a kids' devotional that we read with them. Parents, nobody else is teaching your kids God's Word except for you. And I'm telling you, and 1 hour on Sunday is not enough. They've got to see you do it. So grab one of those devotionals, sit down with them, show them what it's like to be a real follower of Christ, a real believer, and then walk them through the process, right? So that's what I'm doing with my little girls, and I'm reading, and it's the story of Jephthah. Now, my girls that I'm reading to are 8 and 10 years old, and the story of Jephthah isn't exactly like a G-rated story. And so I was like reading this, and it caught me way off guard because I'm tired. I've been wrestling babies. I've been reading to my kids. I've been doing all these things, right? And here we are, and I'm reading Judges chapter 11, verses 1 through 3, and I'll read it as if I'm reading to my kids, so you understand the kind of the awkwardness of the situation, because I haven't explained to my children necessarily all of the intricate details between the relations of a man and a woman, right? Nor how some people have turned those relations into a certain profession. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, Judges chapter 11, you'll catch up with me, okay. Now, Jephthah of Gilead was a great warrior. That's a good third word, right? Ooh, great warrior. I want TJ, the great warrior. I want that one in my life too, right? Okay, he was the son of Gilead. Kind of sounds like a good name. But his mother was I got an 8-year-old in the room, so was a woman. His mother was a woman. That's what I said, right? His mother was a woman, and Gilead's wife, there's another woman there, also had several sons, and when these half-brothers grew up, they chased Jephthah off the land. And then this is what they say. Go to the next, there you go. You will not get any of our father's inheritance, they said, for you are the son of another woman, right? Okay, so Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. Soon, he had a band of worthless rebels following him. And so I'm reading this to my little girls, and I'm thinking, who on earth made this devotional, right? Like I am too tired to go into that amount of detail with my children before bed. Could you imagine the little thoughts in their mind and the dreams that they would have after Dad explained this weird thing, right? Like what's going on, right? And so I was like, I just changed that. But then I began to read the devotional after that. So that's the verse they give us, but then there's this devotional afterwards. And I began to read like, okay, they begin to lay it out. You see, later on in Jephthah's story, he's invited back into the people of Gilead, and God uses him to bring about a great victory. Even though he was the outcast, now he's the hero. Not unlike in the Wild West, where they would hire the gunslinger outlaw to be the new sheriff of town, right? Like that, he's the Wyatt Earp of the Old Testament. You know what I'm talking about? So he comes back in and he saves the day, and God uses him to save the day, and he gives God credit for it. But this devotional that I'm reading to my girls, it lays it out. He goes, and it asks these questions like, hey, have you ever felt like people don't like you for something you can't control? You ever feel like people are pushing you out just because of your history? You ever feel like people just don't like you sometimes, or sometimes you don't like yourself because of what they're saying about you? You see, it's a story of third words, isn't it? It's the third word for Jephthah. You're the son of a... And he might believe, I am the son of a, right? Or my family rejected me, I must be worthless. Or I'll go out here on the edges and hang out with the rebels, the reckless people. Because that's where I belong. That's who I am. I'm not worth what they're worth, so I've got to go to a different place. It's a story of third words. But the cool thing about Jephthah is that God began to work in him and change his third words. And God wasn't deterred, or he wasn't hindered by his situation. I got three things that I want to share with you, real simple things when it comes to Jephthah's story that God wasn't hindered by. The first one is his family history. God wasn't wasn't hurt by his family history. Now, was it the best way for Jephthah to enter the world? I think we could agree that no, that's not it. In fact, in our culture today, and I'm not trying to be too controversial here, our Jephthah's mom's next stop would have been Planned Parenthood. Well, what about his quality of life? It would be terrible. He's an unwanted child. Right? He's going to end up running with some bad people. He's going to get kicked out of his household. He's not going to be accepted. He's not going to be accepted by others, but here's the deal. He was accepted by God. And God never gave up on him. God did not care about his family history. He did not care how he entered the world. He cared about him. Didn't care about what he'd done. Didn't care about what his parents did. Didn't care about what he was educated in or not educated in. Didn't care about any of that. He cared about Jephthah. And he had a plan and a destiny for his life. The world was trying to give him third words like crazy, but God kept pointing at him and going, no, you're mine, you're mine, you're mine. And he was exiled from his family. And we can agree that this is not the greatest moral fabric that he's being pulled from, right? The second thing God isn't hindered by in Jephthah's story is his present company. See, he was running with the wrong crowd, wasn't he? A band of worthless rebels. And he was the leader of them. Like you have to be a pretty hardcore dude if you're going to be the leader of a band of worthless rebels living out in Tob, wherever that is, on the edge of the desert, right? So these are mountain people. You know what I'm talking about? They live by their own set of rules. There's no law up here. We're the law, right? Like, that's who they are. And Jephthah walks in and he goes, I'm the ruler now. I'm the leader. And he's got these leadership skills that he's using them in all the wrong places, but God is setting him up. It's like a proving ground for him. It's like God has set a destiny for him, and the entire way he's learning lessons, and he's learning leadership skills, and he's known as a great, mighty warrior. He's learning all these skills to one day be a deliverer, even though it looks like it's a negative circumstance right now. God's not deterred by your present circumstances. He's not deterred by the people that are around you right now. God has a plan for you. God has a destiny for you. Well, my friends aren't good friends. That's okay. God wants you to lead them into him. Well, you don't know my neighbors or my family or anything like that. No, you're right, I don't, but you do, and God does, and God wants to use you right where you are. Right where you are. Third thing, lack of spirituality. God wasn't hindered by the fact that Jephthah wasn't raised in a God-fearing household necessarily. See, Jephthah wasn't the kind of guy that's like, man, I'm having a bad day. Hey, band of worthless rebels, will you do a Bible study with me real quick and pray with me? Because I'm feeling a little off. Can you help me pray through this one? That's not Jephthah. That might not be you, right? He wasn't a church guy. He wasn't a guy that leaned into the truth of God. He was not raised in a place that went to church, not even on Easter, right? Old Testament, I get it. I know, okay. But think about that. Maybe that's where you are. Maybe that's where you find yourself. Man, I didn't come from this history. I'm not really a church person. I wasn't raised this way. I don't really understand. Listen, God's not hindered by that. It doesn't matter your history when it comes to spirituality. The thing that really matters is, do you see the opportunity that God is placing before you? See, in your history and in your past, you may not be all that God had called you to be, right? But in your future, are you willing to take the opportunities that he gives you? And that's where Jephthah was. You see, eventually the town elders come to Jephthah and they're like, bro, we're in trouble. The Ammonites are going to attack us, and we need a leader. We need a warrior. We need someone to lead us. And Jephthah's like, aren't you guys the ones that kicked me out of here? Aren't you the ones that said I wasn't good enough? Aren't you the ones that ostracized me because of my family history? Aren't you the ones that pushed me out to the edges? And now that I've kind of worked through that process and made a little something of myself, now you want me back? And he could have gotten indignant and pious and been like, no, I'm not helping you guys. You guys can burn to the ground. But he didn't. He saw an opportunity that God was giving him. Just because it wasn't his natural state, his natural flow, the way things have been gone, didn't mean he didn't give up. And maybe you're in a moment like this right now. Man, I don't go to church. I don't know what they're talking about, raising their hands and clapping and this Bible stuff. I don't know any of that. That's okay. Are you willing to take the opportunity that God puts before you today? It doesn't matter what you've done. I want to talk to you about what you will be, about your identity. We have so many things there's so many third words that go, well, I'm not qualified because of this and this and this and this and this. Good thing you can't qualify yourself. Only God can do that, right? The story goes on like this, Judges chapter 11, verse 9. I love this. Jephthah said to the elders, let me get this straight. Let me get this straight. If I come to you, and if the Lord gives me victory over the Ammonites, you will really make me ruler over all the people? And they're like, uh-huh. Yeah, we will. But you know, one thing I noticed in this story, the elders didn't call on God. His family didn't call on God. No one references God in the entire story until this moment. And who's doing it? Jephthah. He may not be living the story that God has for him, but when God interrupts his story, he recognizes it as God right away. He is leading the life that was destined him. The product of his family, the product of his circumstances, the product of, I don't have a dad, I didn't grow up with a mom, I didn't have a good family, I've been surrounded by bad people my whole life. But when God interrupts, he goes, this is God. And he takes hold of the opportunity. In fact, in the book of Judges, there's a lot of leaders. The Bible calls them judges. And out of all the judges in the book of Judges, Jephthah refers to God more than any of them. And it's not because he was raised in church. We know that, right? It's because he took his third words that the world gave him and dismissed them. And he embraced the third words that God was setting him up for. He wasn't getting his identity from his history, his present company, or his lack of spirituality. He was getting his identity from the one who created him. And there's no better source to get your identity as the creation than the creator, the one who put us together, the one who set us up. You see, we can't qualify ourselves. Only God can do that. And when we look at our own strength and our own abilities and our own talent and our own history and all those things, we'll come up with the conclusion that we are unqualified to be used by God. But it's a good thing that we aren't the qualifier. In his book, another quote from the book, he says this, God called me, God equipped me, God empowered me, God opened doors for me. So my qualifications, or lack thereof, are relatively irrelevant. Jephthah, you're broken. You got a bad family. You're hanging out with bad people. You're doing bad things, Jephthah. Yeah, but I don't, my qualifications are bad, but I don't qualify myself. I can't qualify myself. You see, I'm not going to accept the third words that my qualifications bring about. I'm going to accept the third words that God brings about. And I'm going to live up to his standard instead of the standard of the world. I'm going to live to the standard that God has called me to instead of the standard that y'all call me to. Reminds me of a basketball player. I got his scouting report right here. I wrote it down. This is what a scout said about him coming out of college. Far below the NBA standard in regard to explosiveness and athleticism. At 6'2", he's extremely small for the NBA and will likely keep him from being much of a defender at the next level. Struggles defensively, getting around screens. Can overshoot and rush into shots from time to time. Doesn't like it when defenses are too physical with him. He's not a great finisher around the basket due to his size and physical attributes. Makes some silly mistakes at the point guard position and needs to add some muscles to his upper body, but it appears as though he will always be skinny. But Steph Curry's doing okay in the NBA. And if you don't know anything about him, Google it, baby. It's like he's been the standard of what a point guard should be. You see, there are third words for you and I. you're not this enough. You're not that enough. But God's got a whole other set of words for you. Crack open his word, read about it. See what he says about you. Ask him in prayer, God, what are you calling me to do? What are you calling me to be? Who am I? And once you get your identity in him, it begins to change your outlook on life. It begins to change your attitude and the possibilities in front of you. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul writes this to the Corinthian church. He goes, it is not that we think we are qualified to do anything on our own. No, I don't have confidence in who I am, right? I don't have confidence in my own qualifications because I'm not the qualifier. Our qualification comes from God. Not from me, but from God. And he has enabled us to be ministers of his new covenant. You see, I couldn't be a minister, a pastor, in my own qualifications. I don't have what it takes. You can't do what God is calling you to do, the destiny to be a husband or a wife or a parent or a coworker or a friend or an evangelist or anything that he has called you to do without his qualifications. Because our qualifications, it's just not there. But God looks at you. And he doesn't look past your faults, but he helps you in your faults. See, the distance between us and God is what the Bible calls sin. Those things that make us unqualified. He doesn't just go, oh, we'll just sweep those under the rug. He goes, no, I'm going to take care of them. I'm going to wipe them out. I'm going to give you a new life, a fresh start, not a better version of the old you, but a new you. That's what he's saying. Last quote from the book, and then I got one more verse for you. It says this, and here's the best part. God knows everything about you, including the ugly parts, the broken parts, and the dysfunctional parts. You see, we feel unqualified because we know these things about ourselves, right? I know the broken side of me. I know the dysfunctional side of me. I know the internal dialogue inside of me that isn't always positive, that does things and says things that I probably shouldn't be thinking about or saying. And I feel, man, I don't have what it takes. But you know God knows all that's going on inside of you too? There's nothing hidden from him. He knows all of that brokenness and dysfunction, yet he still believes in you. And he still has a future and a hope for you. He still has a future and a hope for each and every one of us, even in our most broken moments. Well, how can we prove this? How do we know that this is the truth? Well, the book of Romans tells us in chapter 5, verse 8, that God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. While we were still in our dysfunction, while we were still in our brokenness and living in our third words that don't come from him, while all that was going on, God was making a way for us to get past that and into something new in him. And that's where it all starts. That's where God's destiny, God's dream for us exists, is where we connect with him. Ask him to help us make it past those third words, to make it past the sin that entangles us and slows us down, to find new life in him. And when we find new life in him, we get to begin to live the life that he's always called us to be the spouse or the parent or the dreamer, the world changer that he's called us to. That's only possible in him. So this morning, here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to pray with you. So if you don't mind, maybe closing your eyes, bowing your heads. No one moving around, so just a quiet moment between you and God. I just want you to talk with God for a second, and I'm going to pray a prayer which will kind of help you with the words, but I'd like to see you. I'd like to see you connect with God in this moment. And you can use these words if you want. Dear God, this morning I pray that you would forgive me of my sins, that the brokenness I've been living in will be wiped away, this dysfunction, Lord, that you would give me a fresh start. And I know I might mess up again, but you're not done with me. You're still working on me. You're working through me. And I pray that my definition of who I am would change, that it wouldn't be the third words that I've picked up along the way based on the mistakes I've made or my earthly qualifications, God. But my third word would come from you, from the qualifications that you've given me, that you love me and you're proud of me, you have a hope for me and a future, Lord. And I pray that each one of us in this room would embrace that, God. In your name, amen.